The Real Estate Photography Podcast is brought to you by tourbuzz.net, high-definition virtual tour and photograph hosting, now with interactive floor plans. Sign up for your free trial today. Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Photography Podcast with Mike Muriello. This is an interview with Alan Blakely. He is a architectural and interior photographer in the Salt Lake City area in Utah. Hi, Alan.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. You?
Good, thank you.
So, Alan, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a commercial photographer specializing in architecture. I do have a studio here in Salt Lake City area and do things other than architecture, but architecture is the bulk of my business. And I do a lot of travel within the United States. I don't travel outside the States for much, but it keeps me busy throughout the year.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ellen and I were just talking before we hit record here. I saw that you're traveling everywhere from Alabama to Wyoming, and well, that's alphabetical. Where are you going, and what are you shooting?
Most of the work that I do on location is for architectural manufacturers of some sort. They have an architectural product that's installed someplace, throughout the United States. And there are still a few. The tendency now is for people to hire photographers in the place that they want the shoot done. But it used to be that the traditional way to do it was to hire one photographer and send him all around. And I still have clients that do that. And so there's several clients that I work for throughout the country. And then there are some situations where somebody just will see my work and want me to shoot something, and it doesn't really matter where I am as long as I can get on a plane.
Well, that's great. Speaking of planes and whatnot, not talk about news, but I was going to say, do you find it increasingly more difficult to get your gear on the plane, or what's your? This is kind of off topic, but I was kind of interested because I recently traveled and did a shoot, and it was a pain. It was really a pain.
Well, it's really difficult now. Up until 9/11, I had baggage waivers on most airlines, and so I could take pretty much anything I wanted on the plane without paying extra for weight or anything like that. And that all ended with 9/11, and then it's just become increasingly difficult. And maybe I shouldn't badmouth TSA, but I will. They've got a real attitude about anybody taking anything on other than what a normal business traveler or a tourist would take. So
no, I totally agree, because I don't even know if anyone's interested in hearing this, but I had my big computer and I had my little netbook, and it's just so asinine. They're like, you have to have one computer per bin, and I completely forgot about the netbook, and there's 3 cameras in a bag, and technically each one of those is a computer. I was Yep. So.
Yeah, the biggest problem I run into is I carry on my camera, and I've got one of those waterproof, airtight cases that is a roller case, and I've got a camera and 7 or 8 lenses and a variety of things in there, and invariably I have some TSA guy who wants to hand inspect the entire case, and so
yeah, I was about to say that actually bothers me because stuff starts to get separated, and it really freaks me out. As soon as 1 gets separated from the pack, and then 2 get separated from the pack, and then you can't keep your eye on everything.
Yeah, I usually when I'm told that they want to hand inspect something, I give them some ground rules based on what the law says that I can do, and one of those is that I repack everything. They don't, they can take it out and put it on the table, but they don't touch it after that.
Yeah.
And so I do all the repacking, and instead of them just kind of fumbling around with things.
One more thing about airline stuff, out of curiosity, do you use that bright orange waterproof case? I don't. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do know. I don't. Mine's very nondescript. Nobody would know it was camera gear if they didn't open it up. Nowhere on it does it say photographer or photography or anything. And as with all my cases, I travel with my lighting cases and things like that too. So I don't advertise that it's photography gear.
It's probably a good idea. Yeah. No, I only asked because I was in a local camera shop, and Intel they were trying to sell me this, but it was there, and they're like, yeah, this is a really good case, and it's like it's highlighter orange, and it's huge, and they're like, yeah, but it's waterproof, and I'm like, but it's orange, you know. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm sorry we got so off topic there. I was going to ask you about how you kind of developed your abilities in architectural photography, and how your path was kind of carved out for that sort of work.
Well, I didn't start out going that direction. I started out in the newspaper business when I was a teenager, and working for a local newspaper as a photojournalist. Kind of continued in that vein into college, and then figured out in college that was not really the place to learn photography, and left school. I ended up graduating with a degree in advertising communications, but not in photography. And worked as a photographer, commercial photographer, for quite a few years in the 1980s. I've always had an interest in architecture, primarily from the work of people like Walker Evans and Philip Traeger and David Plowden, people like that are more fine art photographers, but with a kind of a Max Yavno is another one, but photographing architecture. And so I started to try to dabble in that a little bit, and it's a difficult market to break into. And so about 1992, I guess, I made a concerted effort to market myself to architects and designers, and things kind of took off from there.
So that's kind of the. So you carved it out yourself, you
I did.
Yeah, you went for that market.
Yes. Yeah, it's taken quite a few years to build up a clientele sufficient to make that the bulk of my work. Mm-hmm. It's a tough market right now for photographers to make it in.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I wanted to talk about other stuff, about kind of the details of what it is that you do. So I was going to ask you, before we talk about interiors, I wanted to talk about lighting, because that can apply to interiors, it can apply to the exteriors, which I've selected one of those photos that we'll look at as one of them's an exterior. But I wanted to ask you, how would you describe your style of lighting, and just you go off of that whenever it is.
I guess I would describe it as deliberate.
Okay.
I like to light in such a way that I establish a style of lighting to the room. There's kind of a trend, more so in the real estate market, but in some architectural photographers as well, where the idea is basically just to fill up all the shadows, mm-hmm. and the room has a very flat, open lighting, and I think for real estate situations that may be an advantage, so that there's, it looks very literal, but people don't hire me for that. They hire me to make their rooms look nice and to make them look interesting, and so I try to give the room, or the exterior for that matter, something extra to make it look better than it really does, mm-hmm. And give it a style that makes it look unique.
I see what you're saying. So you're not just filling the room with light, and I'll use the word you just said. You're deliberately picking and choosing where light goes, and what temperature of light, or what hue almost of light is going where.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's just something that takes time to develop. My first few years of shooting were more about controlling contrast than they were about establishing style. Mm-hmm. And it's just, honestly, architectural lighting is probably technically the most difficult area of commercial photography. I do product photography. I shoot editorial work for magazines of people. I do a lot of different things like that. I shot, food in the studio for years, and all of those are easier than architectural work.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really like doing portraits. I'm sure someone who does portraits is going to say, no, it's not. But I say it's very simple to understand, at least I'll say it this way. Simple for me to understand. I know where the light's coming from. I know where it's going to go. I know what it's going to bounce off of. And I know I can kind of control it very simply. But I imagine in some of the stuff that you're shooting, not portrait-wise, I'm talking about commercial and architectural-wise, mm-hmm. It's much different than that.
It is. It's you have to have a plan in mind, and to really make things look polished, you've got to have a sense of how do you design the shot really, as far as the lighting goes.
Yeah, I was going
You
to
know,
say I was
do,
going to use the word calculate. Does that
yeah,
work?
I think so. Yeah, and exposure values and contrast are very critical. People kind of have thought that in the digital situation that you don't have to worry about those things quite as much. And I spent years shooting transparency film, 4x5 of architecture, and you had to bang on with that stuff. And I really think you still do in digital format.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I really do think you gotta calculate that stuff. I've said it before. I said it in the last interview too. I really like exposure fusion. I really, really like it, but I like it as a starting place as opposed to an ending place. And I think that's something some people can get confused. And I say that because exposure fusion doesn't require someone to do as many calculations. You can get a really nice medium tone without doing as many calculations. But I say this again: don't stop there, and don't not use lights if you don't need to. But use it as a tool, not not as everything you do. But anyway.
Yeah, I quite agree. Most of my work now, especially within the past year, the base exposure is an exposure blend of maybe 5 to 7 exposures,
Yep.
upon which then I have layered layers of lighting. So I use HDR techniques, but my stuff doesn't look HDR.
Not in the surreal painting-like look, you're saying.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you, too. I've talked about HDR before on the podcast. It's not that I'm against it at all, because obviously I use exposure fusion. I enjoy the techniques behind, I guess it's, correct me if I'm wrong, computational photography. It's kind of like we're using the resources outside of the actual exposure, like a computer and software to kind of create that image. I really, really like that thing, but I don't like it when it's HDR, really, really fake. I don't like that.
Well, I think if you notice the technique, then the shot's a failure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say when you look at your stuff, it doesn't. I guess you've succeeded when it doesn't look like it was a giant accomplishment of lighting mastery. It just looks like it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk about your interiors. Kind of about. When I look at these, they're beautifully staged. They're elaborately put together. So, what can you tell us about that?
Well, I started out, most of the interiors I did in my early part of my career were with interior designers and very good interior designers. And so I learned a lot working with them because the room was pretty well set up when I got there. My job was to put the camera in the right place and light it properly, and expose it properly. But the room, as far as fussing with the details, they pretty much handled that. And over time, I gained the experience to feel confident about doing a lot of that type of thing myself. And it's unusual now for me to do a shoot where I'm not really involved in the setup of the room and the placement of accessories and the composition of the room, as well as the composition of the photograph.
So you're saying that you are intimately involved in placing the objects where they go.
Right.
Okay.
As for every element of furniture and accessory and things like that, we take into consideration. We don't just let the designer do their thing because it rarely looks right in the camera when it looks right to your eye in the room.
Oh, you're right. No,
So
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, from the camera perspective, you've got to really compose the room that way.
No, I like that too, because I get the feeling that some folks feel like I'm the photographer. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take a picture. Everything will be done for me before I get here, and I'll have coffee waiting for me, and everything is done around the photographer. But what you're saying is you're kind of composing you're involved in composing the shot even before the camera gets there.
Exactly. Yeah, I establish. We go in the room. I kind of I'll survey things and get an idea of where the best vantage point is for the shot. And this is one thing that's kind of confusing for new photographers, is that they kind of think that you've got to walk around and take a dozen shots of a room, and I generally would take one. There's usually one best way to look at a room, and I'll establish that vantage point, and then we compose everything in the room based on that vantage point.
Gotcha. And out of curiosity, are your clients okay with that, getting one shot of that room? Have they become accustomed to it?
They have, and quite honestly, that's really typical of the way most architectural photographers work.
Gotcha.
On the higher end of things. Even if it's for a magazine and an art director is on site, we may take a second view of a room, but the second view will be more of a detail oriented shot, and where the first shot would be more of the wider room view. So we don't really shoot a whole bunch of shots of a room to get it right.
Gotcha. No, I like that. All right, now what about your choices of the objects? And I keep going on staging because I do want to, it's very important, obviously, and it's very apparent in what you do. How do you choose what you use? Does it happen to be on the I'm going to use set, supposedly? Is it on the set, or do you have a truck full of stuff?
I don't prop things myself. I mean, I do sometimes, and that's a separate fee and a separate situation entirely for prop search and purchase and things like that. And often I'll hire an interior designer if it's required. Something like that's required, where I'll have them do the prop search, buy the furniture, buy all the accessories, that sort of thing. But typically we find everything in the home. If it's a residential property, and sometimes we'll be pulling things from all different parts of the house to make the composition look right. We get into these photographs, later in the interview here. I can give you some examples of that, but quite often there are some issues with foreground objects because of a wide lens. You're going to exaggerate the perspective, and you really have to be careful about where you put foreground objects. The same way with placement of colors, to have a harmony of the shot so that you don't have something that draws your attention out of the frame, or something that's going to be distracting. So,
well, I'll tell you what. Since we're talking about it, why don't we just pull up the shots and we'll go back to the other stuff later?
Okay.
Is that all right? All right. Well,
that's fine.
Let's look at the photo one and exactly, and tell us what you're talking about with the foreground versus the background objects.
Okay. In this shot, originally when I walked into the room, if you notice this little end table on the near sofa, it's got a couple books on it there. That actually had a table lamp on it. And so the table lamp was enormous in the shot.
That's what I was about to say.
And so by removing the table lamp and putting on, a low object that has, a darker hue, your eye tends to move into the shot. You'll also notice this little vase here with flowers. That came from a different room entirely. But if you take that out, the room is fairly monochromatic with the exception of the lampshades. Up in that chandelier where you got those red shades. Yep. The room itself is fairly monochromatic, and so I added just that little pop of color there, just to have a little bit more interest and give the eye, a little bit different direction to travel rather than, going out the window or up to that shade.
I gotcha. And the composition of this room, what made you say this is the shot? If you could tell us, I mean, I don't know if that's a good question to begin with, but
well, part of this was the view out the window here. This is a property that's in the Park City area, a ski resort area, and the view of the mountains with snow was important to the interior designer. I shot this for an interior design firm. The property is actually in Utah. The firm is out of Phoenix, and I also liked. I didn't want to have I did do one other shot of this, and I'm not sure if it's on my website or not, which is a very symmetrical view taken looking directly at the fireplace. And it's kind of an interesting view because of the custom carpet. But this view, to me, gave me the right balance of this window expanse to the heavier fireplace shape, and then kind of a balance between these sofas, which these are enormous sofas, and I kind of needed to adjust the scale slightly. And so my camera is a little higher than I would normally put it. My camera is about, I mean, I'm 6 feet tall. My camera's about at eye level in this shot. I normally don't shoot with the camera that high in a room, but that helped me give a little bit more believable scale to the shot.
I gotcha. Now I imagine the windows in on the left that go across. I imagine they just keep going.
Yeah,
much like they do on that, but the opposite, right?
Yes, they do, and then they go into a separate living area, which is decorated completely different. So we needed to end the shot.
That's what I was going to say.
Where that beam is. Yeah.
I was going to say when I was first doing some of these different, not quite this elaborate of a shot or anything, but I foolishly, on the right, I cut the shot off at the fireplace, and I really like how you continue to go to the window because the shot doesn't really end at the fireplace. The room doesn't end at the fireplace. It keeps going, and it also, just adding that little bit can change the entire feeling.
Yeah, it gives it takes some of the weight off of that, that shape of the fireplace by adding that window expanse to the right of it just a little bit. Definitely.
I really like it, and that's why I had asked you to talk about this one, because it caught my eye. I really like the lighting, and I really like... well, I was going to ask you about everyone seems to have a philosophy on windows and how bright they should be or how not so bright. And when there's a view, the view trumps all. So I wondered if you could tell us about the view and your philosophy on windows.
Well, it kind of varies for me. This window, the exposure through the window here is about as dark as I ever like to keep an exposure through a window. When it gets any darker than that, to where it meets... basically the balance of the indoors, it tends to look like wallpaper. It just doesn't look right. And so typically my outdoors is exposed, 1 to 3 stops lighter than the indoor, so that it looks like outside. And depending on what's out there, I may go for something like this where it's something that really want the viewer to see, or I may just let it wash out a little bit. So if it's some kind of detail, it's not attractive.
Gotcha. Yeah. I was going to say, I really like that term that you just used there, wallpaper. It looks like wallpaper if it's too, if you underexpose it, basically make it the same exposure as the inside.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Is that all you wanted to say about this one?
Well, this one here is actually an exposure blend. This is 7 exposures.
Okay.
In order to pull in that window. The option otherwise would have been to take a separate window exposure and then composite it, but with all of the different details through those windows, it wasn't something I even wanted to attempt. I mean, I've done stuff like that, but it's not a fun job, and I usually hand it off to my assistant to do. But this one was just a blend, so that I didn't have really hardly any post-production at all on this.
The easier the better, right?
Right.
I think, like I said earlier, it's all about that. When you look at it, you've done it right when it doesn't look as calculated, but it was calculated, but doesn't look like a feat of mastery.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the second photo, which is of this bath, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite a nice bath. This is an $18 million home.
Oh, is that all?
That it's in Park City. Yeah, and this was actually to advertise the home for sale is what this is basically for. And this is a rather large room, and to keep it looking from a little bit like a car wash, I backed up a little bit and included this vanity or this bureau in the foreground here to try to add some style. But it's a rather big room. This was shot during the middle of the day. If you see that blind back there, and there's a window with a blind back there to the left of the bathtub.
Yep.
And you'll see a little bit of illumination there. And this is just shot in the middle of the day, but I wanted to make this appear to be a little bit more moody, kind of like an evening shot.
Well, I was going to say, I would have never known that it was during the middle of the day or any of that stuff. I think the word moody is really good, too. I feel like it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's natural. that's too generic, but it does feel very natural and not forced. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the existing lighting in here kind of gave this type of feeling, but was not adequate to give me an exposure that looked like this. And so I kind of had to go with that, basically the look that the lighting designer had in mind, but add lighting so that it was something that I could create a decent photograph with.
I gotcha. Now, here's a question about the artwork on the back underneath that window.
Hmm.
What did you think about when you were making that? Did you think I want to kind of cover it up? I want to bring it out. How do you work with that?
Well, it was not a very attractive piece, but were I to take that out, then I have pretty blank space there, and I would rather have covered up that negative space and then made it a little bit nondescript than to have taken it out completely.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't happy with the painting, and there wasn't really another good option that was in the right palette in the house elsewhere, and so we kept this painting in there. But it was a point of discussion as I did the shot.
No, yeah, I was going to say, because let's just say this, I'm not distracted by it, and I was just impressed that I wasn't distracted by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, had I taken that urn out that's on the far side there and given you a full view of the painting, it's some kind of a caricature type picture of a person, and it just did not fit the room to me. So by covering it up a little bit, it's not really understood as being a caricature, and I don't think people look at it that much.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was just going to say, in terms of architecture, is that a fireplace I see? No, I was gonna at the bathtub. No, I think it's a little elaborate, right?
It is, and we did another shot. Actually, the faucet for this bathtub comes out of the ceiling, and so there's a stream of water that comes out of the ceiling directly above the bathtub. You can see the fixture there.
Oh my gosh.
But it was just kind of too much for the shot, and so we opted not to show the bathtub filling. And the fireplace was actually not functional, and so they hadn't had the gas line hooked up to it yet. So I actually added the fireplace, the fire itself in post-production. That's actually the fireplace out of my upstairs family room. So.
But you'd never know. I mean, it's just not even a question that would come to mind. So. Mm-hmm. Well, that's really, really great. Again, I think it's a really interesting photograph. Let's just say this: it flows really well because my eye goes from one thing to the next, and it's not jumping; it's very flowing.
Yeah, when I set the shot up, I like the idea of these two opposing curves: the curve of the bureau here, and then the curve of the shower. You've also got a small curve as well on the bathtub, but integrating those types of shapes in a shot keeps the eye interested, I think.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's move on to the last photo, which is an exterior of a house. And this comes up, I have another question later about the before and after section on your website, and I think this is one of them.
It is.
So, all right, so tell us about this.
This is a shot I did for a home builder, and this was one of their model homes. They wanted a dusk shot, but they didn't want to, lose any detail, anything, and keep the sky fairly light. They had a shot in mind from another shot I'd done previously for a different client, and so I set this shot up. Got there fairly early in the afternoon and scoped everything out. Got all the blinds and shutters and everything like that oriented the proper direction. The illumination in the house where I needed it. I'm lighting the exterior with tungsten lights. I've got I think there's either 3 or 4 airy Fresnel spots that I'm using to light up the lawn and the front elevation of the home. And then this is a 7 exposure blend as well.
Okay.
And I just blended. I kept the lights on for the entire time, and just did a bracket of 7 exposures. My normal being in the middle, and then 1, 2, and 3 stops either direction on that, and then blended these in Photomatics in their exposure blending or exposure fusion utility.
I was going to say I spend most of my life in that exposure fusion part, so yeah, I can relate.
But yeah, this is one that I included in the before and after because you couldn't do this kind of thing on film, and a lot of my shots looked like the before sections when I was shooting film. It was just kind of frustrating.
And I missed this, but you said you came to scope it out in the afternoon, but you came back at dusk. This is not a pasted-in sky. This is the real sky.
No, this is the real sky. I actually stayed there the entire time because I've retouched out cords running across the sidewalks and things like that because that's one of the problems with a residential property is that it's difficult to find places to plug in. So I carry several hundred feet of extension cords with me all the time, and so I set up the composition when it was still late afternoon before it got to be dusk, and so because you really got a window maybe of 15 minutes when the balance between the house and the sky is going to be right, and if you miss it, you miss it, and you have to come back the next day. So I usually like to set up fairly early, get the shot completely composed, get everything perfect, and then just wait for the light to achieve the proper balance between my lighting and the ambient light.
Makes sense to me. It definitely does. Now let's talk about the fact that you do the before and the after section on your website, and this is one of them. I guess I don't have the before photo on here, but we could tell people go to the website. What did you do to this to make it the after?
Basically, it's just the exposure fusion. I did increase saturation slightly, and I did bring a gradient in Lightroom. This was all actually done in Lightroom using the Photomatics plugin, and I added just a little bit of a gradient to the sky and a little bit of highlight recovery, not too much, and then a little bit of saturation, and that's it. And then it was just exported without even going into Photoshop.
I was going to say, it doesn't feel like it feels organic. It doesn't feel like there's a lot done to it. It feels punched up, but not. You didn't put in this crazy sky, which is why I was asking, because it looked like a really nice sky. I was wondering, did you paste this in the afternoon?
Yeah, no, that's the real deal there. And one of those brackets when I shot the exposure range gave me that sky, so that's where it was. I did take it into Photoshop to take out the cords because I did have a cord running from an outlet on the porch, down the front walkway here. And I took that out as well as the outlet on the porch. So
well, I was going to say Lightroom isn't really built for that anyway, right? So
no, not at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, back to the questions. I asked about your before and after section. Do people respond to that other than photographers? Do clients like to see that?
Clients usually will always look at that. They rarely mention it to me.
Okay.
The bulk of the comments I get are from photographers wanting to know how certain things were done. But I think it's an important thing to have in there, especially in digital format, because there are a lot of things that you can do to enhance a shot that don't look like enhancements that you could never do on film. I tell people that I can give them better photography than I ever could, just basically because of the digital format. But I think it's a strong point so people can see that a shot that maybe they've gotten from someone else or that they've taken themselves can look substantially better by hiring a professional.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. I hadn't thought of maybe I'm going to have a before and after section. Well, Alan, what else do you shoot? You mentioned it earlier, and I wanted to ask you, what else do you shoot besides architecture and commercial jobs?
Well, everything I shoot is commercial. I don't do anything retail.
Okay.
I never have. Portraits or weddings or things like that. I've never done anything in the retail market. I get calls from magazines, mostly trade magazines, to shoot people, and I shoot a lot of executives and profile people for magazines and things like that. I shoot annual reports as well, which are a variety of different things. I started out primarily as a product photographer and shooting people as well, but before I ever got into architecture. But my product photography is, I really haven't given it any attention, say, in the last 10 years. And so I don't do a lot of that anymore. I used to also do a lot of food, and I don't do too much of that anymore. About 75% of what I shoot is architecture.
Gotcha. All right, and here's the last question. This is a question I ask everyone who comes on the interview. What advice would you give someone getting started in real estate photography right now?
That's a good question. Real estate photography is kind of an anomaly, I think, as far as professional photography, because you've got to be extraordinarily efficient. Most agents or brokers or homeowners will not spend a large amount of money to have their home shot. There are exceptions to that when you get into multi-million-dollar homes and things like that. But so a person has to be very efficient, and their exposures have got to be just dead on, and the compositions have to be interesting as well. But I really think, whether it's real estate photography or architectural photography for that matter, that if a person can find someone who does it really well in their area and assist that person, even if they don't get paid for it, that's probably the best education they'll get.
Great. Yeah, I definitely like that idea. Anyone looking to assist, come to me. No, okay.
And I have people come in from different parts of the country to assist me at no charge, and they're happy to do it, just because there's not really another avenue. Architectural photography is one of those disciplines where it's still kind of a craft, and people find someone who has mastered it, and come to them as an apprentice, so to say.
I was about to say, in a non-condescending fashion, it's like a watchmaker. I once knew a man who was a watchmaker and repairman, and you don't learn this stuff from anyone but that guy, Yeah. And it's it sounds silly. That's what I'm trying to say. It sounds silly. Oh, you're like a watchmaker, but I think it's very true that there's a very a niche, kind of field that you go to school and you're going to learn a lot about watches, but not about this specific type of watch, and
Yeah, I think that's a fair analogy. There are people who come out of school and think that they can jump into this market, and it just doesn't work. I can't think of anybody offhand who has come out of school and been a successful architectural photographer. And I did assist other architectural photographers when I first started out, and there are things you learn there that are not shared in textbooks or magazine articles or otherwise.
Right. Hey, that's one of the benefits of assisting. It's not necessarily what do they call it? It's not like a hazing experience where everyone has to go through it or something. It's supposed to be an in-depth learning experience, and I'll tell you what, from some of the assistants that I know, some of them say, I'm glad I assisted because this is not what I want to do, or this is not the area that I thought I wanted to do this, but I'm really glad I had this, 6-month experience where I got to, jump in the pool, but I'm glad I can get out.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've had several assistants who kind of thought the same thing, that this was what they really wanted to do, and they've since moved on to other areas of photography. So
right.
It's not for everyone.
All right. Well, Alan, I think that's all the time we have today. I appreciate you being on the Real Estate Photography Podcast, and that's it.
All right, my pleasure.
All right, thanks, Alan. Bye.
Thank you, Mike. Bye.